Sir, I have some terrible news. I went ahead and made the mistake of saying on the internet that I thought you were the greatest flintlock military musket ever developed. The internet was not very happy, sir. Matter of fact, I have a message I'm supposed to convey to you. The entire internet has declared war upon you. Not upon France, not upon the Emperor himself, but upon you. What's that? Oh, you don't care? You know what? I think that's more of a compliment myself. Hey, this, you filthy casual! Yeah!
Wellington's beaten. He's bled to death. Now move the old guard forward, then on to Brussels.
Avancez! Compagnie! En avant!
Okay guys, so I wasn't planning on doing this. I was planning on just doing a shooting video, quick, fun, down and dirty, but you know what? There's so much information on this gun right here, and yes, I've already done the shooting sequence. It's actually 11 o'clock at night whenever I'm starting to film this, but there's so much history on this gun that nobody, and I mean nobody, covers, and it's a crying shame because the man who came up with this gun is quite honestly one of the most underrated firearms manufacturers or designers in my book. You never hear his name. He's not as well known as Kalashnikov or Browning or any of those guys, but I'd say he's probably contributed more to the firearms community than any of those guys. And that guy's name is Monsieur Jean-Baptiste Vaquet de Gribeauval.
100 yards, 10-inch steel plate with a smoothbore musket.
But we'll get into his story in just a little bit. So, where do we start the story of the 1770, or in this case, the AN-9 Corrigé, or correction, AN-9 musket? Well, for that, we need to go back to the 1754. You see, the 1754 was widely used in the 7 Years' War period. And the thing that it was discovered in the 7 Years' War, especially here in North America where we call it the French and Indian War, is that the gun was heavy. The gun was long, and nobody wanted to pack around that great big old long pole all day. So there was a man who was tasked with building a lighter musket. Our story actually begins with one Duc de Choiseul, I believe is how his name was pronounced, and he was tasked with making the 1754 French musket, the Modèle 1754, if you would, lighter, shorter, and more handy for the troops. And here's one thing you're going to have to realize in this story. Guns are going to change about every single time the wind does in France from the time of 1754 until the year of 1777. Every couple of years there's going to be some big upgrade in the system. So the Duke de Choiseul, or the Duke of Choiseul, comes up with this musket. And this musket is the very famous 1763 musket. Pedersoli makes a copy of it. It's pretty popular nowadays, but it wasn't so popular back in the 18th century. You see, the Duke was assigned to make this musket lighter than the 1754. He failed miserably. Matter of fact, did he not only make the musket not lighter than the 1754, he actually ended up making the gun quite a bit heavier, and it was still just as long. And the French troops absolutely despised this musket. Matter of fact, they gave it the nickname the 1763 Lourd, or heavy musket, because it was the heaviest musket that they had been assigned yet. Matter of fact, once a new design comes along later on, we're going to see pretty much the entire inventory of 1763s, or Lourd, or Stainville, because the Duke's name was Stainville, or Stainville. These muskets are going to be sent to the United States, along with some other models that we're getting ready to talk about. So in 1765, one of Stanville's, or whatever you want to call him, the Duke, we'll just call him that, one of his employees that was working under him had seen the flaws of this gun, and in 1765 began making some pretty important improvements of lightening the gun. And this man's name was Monsieur Montbéliard. This man was developing, at the time, the 1766. My favorite gun of all time, by the way. So, hats off to Monsieur Montbéliard. The 1766, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of history on it right now because this isn't a 1766 video. We'll do that in one in the future on Old Char. But the 1766, suffice to say, was what the 1763 was supposed to be in the first place. So what else he had noticed was there were some reliability issues with the 1754 and the 1763. So what he had done was he improved the metallurgy of the guns. He got better iron for making the steel, and he almost doubled the strength of the mainspring. And what he found was that because he doubled the strength of that mainspring, the swan-necked cocks that were on the 1754s, and yes, before everybody jumps my case, this on a flintlock musket is not a hammer. That is the cock. This is the hammer. In the 18th century, that's how it works. So, to avoid confusion. But what he had found is that the swan-necked cocks on the older models were snapping. Matter of fact, what I have here is an original, and that lock is a 1728 lock, and you can see that it is a swan-necked cock. Also, the throw or the weight on the cock on this one, mainspring, very light, extremely light, compared to something even like this military heritage gun. So what he did was, like I said, he doubled up the strength of that mainspring, and the swan neck cock started snapping. Well, what he did was he went to a solid design, and then he went to what was called the two-arm cock design, which I like to call the pierced heart cock, because it looks like a pierced heart. This style of cock was much stronger. As I've stated before, it's one of the reasons why I prefer it over like the Brown Bess or the land pattern musket, is because I know that this gun is going to be more durable just because of that. He took a test batch of 500 of these muskets, gave them out to infantrymen, and they fired 40 rounds, replaced the flints, fired 40 more rounds. They replaced the flints every 40 rounds. They fired 120 rounds consecutively without a single misfire. That may not seem like a lot by modern day standards, but by flintlock standards, especially in the 1760s, it's unheard of. This was, well, not this one, but the 1766 was the most reliable musket of its time. It was a huge step forward. So let's step forward a little bit more. The 1766 is kind of what the French government decides they're going to go with for their long arm. And they have Montbéliard in charge, basically, of the three main factories, because one thing I should have mentioned about the Duke Stainville, one thing he did that was good was he got three major manufacturing plants, and he said, we all need to work together to create firearms for the king. The three plants were Charleville, Maubeuge, and Saint Etienne. These were the three main manufacturers of French small arms. And Montbéliard was in charge of all three of them. Now, he had how do I put this? An acquaintance. Wasn't really his friend, but he had an acquaintance that he put in charge begrudgingly, that he made the inspector of Saint Etienne. And this man's name was Monsieur Bellegarde. Monsieur Bellegarde also had a friend that was working with him, whose name was Monsieur Jean-Baptiste Vaquet de Gribeauval. Yeah, that's a mouthful. But Gribeauval and Bellegarde started to notice some issues with the 1766. It was very reliable, it was very light, it was very handy. Problem was, and they proved it, that over very long extended periods of firing without cleaning, the barrel, which Montbéliard had made very thin, could burst with the heavy charges that the French military used. And yes, the French military used heavy charges. They were not loading with 85 grain charges of 1F. There's a lot of, I call it the modern day black powder FUD lore. I'm going to need to do a series on that because there's a lot of crazy stuff they say out there. You know, they never used over 85 grains. Actually, the French standard charge was 155 grains to 165 grains, depending on the time period. So this whole theory of, and it was true, of the 1766 barrels being too thin was actually pretty well founded. Bellegarde and Gribeauval actually went and proved them and tested them and found out that if you fired them excessively and fired them dirty, they could produce excessive pressures. And these would either bulge the barrels till you couldn't use them anymore, or in a certain few cases actually burst the barrels. And this caused, in 1768, Montbéliard to get fired. He was forcefully dismissed, and he was replaced by one Monsieur de Maury. So let's talk about Monsieur Gribeauval a little bit. He was born in 1715 in Amiens. He was born to nobility, and he quickly went to the Royal Artillery Academy, and he became an officer in the artillery. He fought in the 7 Years' War. Needless to say, he got promoted all the way up to Lieutenant General in the Artillery Corps. He also went, while he was in the artillery, he was a genius man, and he went and did something that I think was probably the most important single thing that I can think of off the top of my head for firearms industries, and that was, here it goes, he invented the idea of interchangeable parts. Now I know, a lot of people are going to say, well, actually, didn't Samuel Colt do that? Actually, no. Gribeauval was doing it in the 1760s. And in 1770, he had the design for a really slick, smooth gun that him and Bellegarde had been working on. They started early in 1769, and it was an improvement on the 1766. Basically, what they did was they changed out the barrel. They put a thicker barrel on it. They also changed up the stock to make it thicker up front. I think I've mentioned before about old Char. I call her a 1766-68. I was actually wrong. It would be a 1766-69 because of the stock shape. That would be a retrofitted 1766 with a stock that was thicker towards the back and with the rear barrel band retaining spring. This was going to be a very, very nice firearm, but there's one problem with it. The new Minister of War, Chassel, and no, it's not the Duc de Chassel. The man's name is actually Chassel. Gets accused of proclaiming firearms as outdated and obsolete and selling them for personal profit overseas. And this gets him replaced by one Monsieur Montagnard, and Montagnard replaces Gribeauval with one, I believe the name is pronounced this way, Valeret. Valeret is the son of one of the inventors of the 1754. And Valeret has a very interesting take on things. You see, the 1770 model was going to be a very sleek musket. It was going to have all the perks of the 1766. It was still going to be fairly light due to changes in the stock. Like I said, it would be thicker up front, but they thinned it out in the back. They made it all kind of work. It would still be very light, extremely reliable, and also very easy to produce because it would have interchangeable parts. And not only interchangeable parts, something that changed on the French muskets at this time was the geometry of the parts. If you look at an earlier musket like Old Char, you'll look at here on the cock and you'll notice that the cock is actually flattened right there, along with a lot of other things. There's very beautiful, intricate cuts and everything. Everything's got all sorts of different shapes to it. I mean, even the 1728, we look at the pan here, and it's cut in an octagonal shape. You see here we got this is all flat. A lot of filing work is done on these locks. Gribeval had figured out a system that would cause the guns to be easier to produce by rounding off all these parts. He said we don't need all these fancy cuts and everything. Make the pan round, make the cock round, make everything round. It's stronger. There's not much that is stronger than a round shape, and it's easier to produce. And Valery did not like that idea. He thought it looked ugly. I kid you not. This was his theory for why he did what he did. So he came up with a new musket that actually took place. They were going to replace the 1770, 69, 66, 63s, all these different guns that are laying in the stockpile. They had, clear back from this time period, guys, in their stores, they had 1717, 1728, 1728-34s, 1728-54, 1763, 1766s, 1769s, and 1770s. And the new gun, they came up with this conclusion that they were going to replace them all with one good musket. And that new musket was going to be the model 1773. There's a little problem with this, though. Monsieur Valery decided, like I said, that the 1770 and the 69 were ugly. And so what he decided to do was go back, and he remade the musket as the 1763, or the Lou, the heavy. It was almost identical. And all the marshals and all of the generals were seeing this, and they were like, no, cease fire. No, stop that. Quit it. And it did not take long for them to appeal to the king to reinstate all of the old managers, Gribeval, Chasseul, Bellegarde. All these guys are going to get reinstated in 1773 because they are just, these generals, these marshals are looking at this project and they're like, no, we don't want to go backwards. And so they all get reinstated. Valery gets fired. They only make like 30,000 of the Valery muskets or the 1773s before they're like, yeah, this is just ridiculous. And so Gribeval is back to making muskets. And he's in charge of all three factories now. He goes ahead and he has an acquaintance that works at Saint-Etienne. He is the chief inspector general of that plant. His name is Henri Blanc. Henri Blanc was born into a pretty poor family. He had no formal education, but he was really, really good with muskets and knowing how to make them tick. And Henri Blanc was basically given, they gave him a 1770, and they said, all right, here's what we have put together. What would you do to make it better? And he went ahead and he did some modifications to it. I'm not going to go into it all right here because there was a lot of littler ones. But suffice it to say is that he actually thinned down the tip of the barrel because he had found that the pressure spike that was happening with the 66s was happening in the back towards the breech. And the pressure was getting pretty well lowered out towards the end of the muzzle, so he didn't see fit to having a really thick muzzle. So it's a lighter musket. It was lighter. It was a little shorter. He had moved the bayonet lug around a little bit. He had moved it closer down to the rammer, and the soldiers absolutely loved this gun. Matter of fact, they named it the Inspector General musket. And this musket would go into full-scale production, and they basically stuck to the same design up until 1776. And if you didn't know, 1776 was a very exciting year for the world as a whole, especially here in North America. But I digress. This has, what I'm about to talk to you about, has nothing to do with the American War of Independence just yet. You see the 1774 had picked up enough little changes along the way that by the time it gets to 1776, it is almost a different musket. They get together and they start designing what Gribeval is going to call the ideal infantry musket. By the way, I skipped a ton of different variants of muskets that they went through. I think there was something like 18 different kinds of muskets that were developed from the time of 1763 until 1777. It's insane. I'm just covering the main infantry ones. But a lot of lessons were learned along the way, and Gribeauval and Blanc get together and they say, we're going to build a musket that is going to be durable as the 1763. However, it's going to be as light and reliable, if not a little more reliable, than the 1766. It's going to be as robust as the 1774. And we're going to add one more thing in for a criteria. Remember I talked about earlier the Gribeauval system. Well, the Gribeauval system was interchangeable parts. To quote Mr. Gribeauval himself, he said, I want to be able to take a lock off of a gun from Charleville, take a barrel from Maubeuge, and a stock from Saint-Etienne, put them all together and make a gun that functions perfectly. And he didn't just do this with the small arms, he also did it with the artillery. But he actually got interchangeable parts. He got machinery that would make the same part over and over and over and over again. And he did a lot of things that were cutting down on a lot of the time. Remember I said we did a lot of rounding off on certain things on the 1770 and the 1774 to make them quicker to produce. And after all this, in 1777, they came out with a new musket. And what do you think it was called? The Modèle 1777 Fusil, or however you say 1777 in French. Basically, this was Gribeauval's idea of what a perfect infantry flintlock musket should look like. And I've got to say that for the time, I think he nailed it. Mind you, like I said before, this gun is dirty. We've been shooting this gun a lot. And let me just go over with you some of the features that make it a 1777 and not a 1766 or a 63 or a 54 or a 70 or a 73 or a 74 or a 74-76. What makes this a 1777? So let's go ahead and let's start out here at the tip of the muzzle. So you'll notice, and by the way, Military Heritage, they did a pretty good job at replicating this musket, but they do get some things wrong. The ramrod is correct. So we have this nice little coned out rammer here. We also have the bayonet lug down there at the bottom of the barrel. That is correct. One thing I'll say is a little off is this front barrel band. So this whole area up here is supposed to be swelled out and all opened up, so it funnels your rammer into the slot. You can tell here they just drilled a hole. That's a pretty easy fix in all reality. But yeah, so there's one thing that they got wrong. Front sight on the barrel band. Very good, very good. Moving backwards. And also, I'm actually looking at the picture of the original, and they got this barrel band. The shape, the overall shape looks pretty good aside from that front section. Yeah, so our retaining clip here, it's looking good. Oh, by the way, this is not actually technically a 1777. This is a this is an A&9 Courage musket. I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, which is the correction, A&9, Year of the Revolution, 9. But it's still a 1777. We'll get into that in a second. But center barrel band, let me look at the picture. Let me look here. Looking pretty good. Pretty good. Rear barrel band. Perfect. You have it butting up against the shoulder here, and the clip not going into a hole, but holding the whole barrel band in place. The lock is ideal. The markings look correct. The cock, the pan, everything looks right. And like I said, this is where I want to start talking about what makes this a 1777 and what makes it so cool. So what they had found out was, and if you shoot enough flintlock muskets, especially ones that have got the straight pan, watch the videos in slow motion and you can actually watch where your sparks hit. A lot of times your sparks will actually shoot out in front of the pan. And this can be a little bit of a problem. Also, a lot of times, the more powder you put into the pan, I want to do a video on this sometimes because I hear people say it all the time. They say, the more powder you put in the pan, the less likely it is to go off instantaneously because you have a match effect. So you need to just put as little bit of powder in the pan as possible. I've found that's more likely to get me a misfire than anything, and I really haven't noticed the match effect that people talk about, but I could be wrong. But they put a very generous alloy pan on this thing, and it is also sloped down at that angle for better reliability. Also, we notice, we look at the cock and everything on here, everything's rounded off. I know that this is a swan neck, but let's look at the 1728, original 1728 lock, and you'll see what I'm talking about. The cock here is rounded. That gun right there is fairly light though compared to this thing. Like I said, look, rounded. The plate is rounded. The finial on the mainspring is rounded. The pan is rounded. Everything is rounded off. Also, they put this little tilted up point on the tip of the pan. That's for more reliability again. Gives you a little more surface area to scrape on without, you know, hitting your flint on the top of your hammer there. Let's see what else. These guns will all be marked on the back, and this one is too. Model 1777 or MLE 1777, and depending on where yours is made or where it's supposed to be replicating it was made at, you will get either an S, a C, or in this case, a big old capital E for Etienne right here on the side of the barrel. Now another thing I'd like to point out is we notice this trigger here is extremely straight and boring. That is, again, to speed along the process of making these guns. It was discovered that a straight trigger is just going to be much quicker to produce than trying to put a nice little curl to it. Let's see here. Also, another nice thing they put on here is this nice little set of finger grooves on the trigger guard. Indexes your hand very good. Always get your hand in the same position. Now let me point out something. I have a love-hate relationship. I really loved it to start out with, but then it punched me in the mouth and made me bleed. Let me explain. This scallop cut in the stock, this is a big giveaway of a 77 or an AN9 or something of that ilk. And the reason why this is done the way it is because Monsieur de Gribeauval had discovered, same as I did, that the 1766 stock tended to, when you fired it, come up and hit you in the jaw really hard. And that can give you the jitters after shooting one of these things with a heavy powder charge multiple times. Especially, you just keep hitting in the face, and by the time it's all said and done, at the end of the day, your jaw just hurts. His fix to that was to cut out this scallop here. And what this does is when the gun fires, instead of the gun coming up and hitting you in the jawbone, it'll tend to slide along your face a little more. So that's the nice part. Here's the bad part. In order to do that, you leave this nice little lump right there in the front, right where, if you shoot like I do, your mouth is. And when you load this thing up with 155 grains of powder and you throw it to your shoulder and you're not holding it very tight, that momentum will come back, bring it back right into your mouth, split your lip open, make you bleed. And especially if you, I don't know, mispronounce baguette or croissant or something like that beforehand, it will punch you in the mouth and make you bleed. So you better be shouldering it well. Other than that, though, the butt plate is just kind of a standard butt plate. But yeah, so that is what makes a 1777 a 1777.
So let's go ahead and load her up and take a shot. This, the French Model 1777, is the absolute best flintlock musket ever developed, and I will explain why I think so in a second. But first of all, let's go ahead and load her up right quick and take a shot. Got here a paper cartridge loaded with a 64 caliber musket ball and 155 grains of homemade 1F. So let's go ahead and prime her up. We got a very generous pan on this gun to put a lot of powder, but we'll talk about that a little more here in a second. Go ahead and push that on down the barrel, and it's a very tight fit. I'm going to talk about one thing I do not like about this gun here in a second. I guess you could call it a love-hate relationship with one of the things on here, but okay, we're loaded up. Let's go ahead and take a shot. I've been in this position before at the Battle of Marengo. They said I had lost the battle by 5, but I had won it back again at 7! So much fun. "100 yards, 10-inch steel plate with a smoothbore musket." All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and do something we've never done on this channel before, and we're going to chronograph a smoothbore musket. Now, like I said, this is a 64 caliber musket ball. It weighs 410 grains, and it's 155 grains of powder. not including what we used out of the cartridge to prime with. So here we go. I'm only going to do this one time, and hopefully I don't shoot the chronograph. 1,316 feet per second. Let's crunch the numbers. Ooh, that one hit. So after crunching the numbers, that hit with 1,571 foot-pounds of energy. To put that into perspective, your average 9mm hits with about 350.
So let's get a little bit more into detail on the development of the 1777. So as I'd stated before, Mr. Honoré Blanc and Monsieur de Gribeauval had wanted to put together a weapon that was the ideal infantry fighting musket. So the new Minister of War, the Comte de Saint-Germain, was his name. He went and he liked Gribeauval's idea of making a new infantry musket and also modernizing the French artillery. And so what he did was he gave Mr. Gribeauval a meeting with King Louis XVI. And King Louis listened to Gribeauval, liked his idea, and sent him out with a message to the Minister of War, Comte de Saint-Germain, and told him that he was to aid him in anything he asked for, he was to have it. This might play a little bit into King Louis's downfall later on, because this is kind of how he was. People would give him an idea of what they wanted, and they'd say, "Money, please," and he would start giving them out them dollar bills. And this is what he did to Gribeauval, because, like I said, he knew what he was doing. Gribeauval, first thing he does is he goes and he builds his own dream team, and the guy front and center with him is Monsieur Honoré Blanc. Gribeauval has to go back, and he is going to try to revolutionize the cannon making industry because, like I said, he's an artillery officer, not really an infantryman. So he goes back and he starts working with cannon, and the thing that he's really stressing at this point is your raw materials, best quality raw materials you can find. He set up a coding system, and the materials had to meet the code. The production line had to meet the code. The tooling had to meet the code. The men who built these things had to meet the code. This was his system. And once he gets the artillery modernized, and that's what he did, he modernized, made a better cannon, he came back to Saint Etienne and began working with Blanc on the 1777. So once they got this all underway, and by the way, they did this relatively quickly. They had the Royal Decree of 1776, which was what started putting out the requirements and the coding for the raw materials. And on January 26th of 1777, they got the new federal regulation for small arms. And like I said, the reason they do this is interchangeability of parts. Now, there are, again, going to be the 3 factories making these guns. And I may have mentioned this before, but it's going to be Charleville, Maubeuge, and Saint Etienne. The last one is actually going to be responsible for over 2/3 of the guns made in the first 12 years. And it is said that these were, from 1777 to 1789, Saint Etienne was putting out the absolute highest quality infantry musket in the world in the 1777. Now, why do I say until 1789? Because we know the 1777 was really in production until the early 1820s. And the reason for that is because there's this little thing that kicks off in France known as the French Revolution. You see, after they went and they gave a bunch of guns and money and powder and ammunition and a few ships over to the United States, and we used them to defeat the British, along with a bunch of soldiers. By the way, like I mentioned, the 1777 was used in the War of Independence. It was not, however, due to anything I can find, used by American troops. It was used by French troops at Yorktown because it was the new hotness, if you would, for them. And they're definitely not going to be surplusing those out to another country. After all the money, guns, powder, ammunition, ships, and bodies that have been sent to the United States to help fight off yet another war in North America, half a world away from the French, it was actually Louis who had told Montcalm a few decades earlier in the French and Indian War, when Montcalm had asked for more troops to come to North America because they were getting overran by the British. The king wrote back to Montcalm and said, "Why would I send men to go put out the fire in the barn whenever the house is on fire?" And this was kind of the general opinion of the French people at this time. They really didn't care that much about North America, and they were getting really sick and tired of all their money and sons and fathers being sent over there. And eventually they get so upset about it, they go ahead and they go form their own revolution. They overthrow their king. I'm not going to go deep into the French Revolution, but suffice to say, from everything I've read, it is extremely, strikingly similar to the Communist Revolution, and not in a good way. They had what was known as the Reign of Terror, the National Razor. Things like this were coming out of the woodwork. Matter of fact, from the way, I haven't found it personally, but the way it's written, it really does sound like this may be where our hero, Monsieur Jean-Baptiste Gribeauval, who was born an aristocrat, may or may not have met his end, because he dies within the first couple of years of the French Revolution. And I do know that he was fired from his position, and he basically, I couldn't find out, but I'm assuming he probably got the chippity-choppity on the National Razor, along with several other aristocrats. And it was at this time in 1789 that the quality production of the 1777 is going to drop drastically. Matter of fact, they say guns made from 1789 to 1794 should not be fired because they were deemed unsafe coming out of the factory. Why is this? Well, just like the Communist Revolution, when you go and you start getting rid of all of your talented work and your guys who actually know what they're doing with this stuff, you get rid of your intellectuals, if you would, and send them to the Gulag, or you send them to the National Razor, or they get the Russian flu. There's going to be a gap in the skill set on these things, and the people that are filling these are not near as good as the people that you just got rid of. And so a lot of the guys who are building the guns, the workmen, the men running the machines, a lot of them are going to get executed, and a lot of them are going to get banished, and a lot of them are going to flee for their lives. Because working at a place like Charleville, Maubeuge, or Saint-Etienne is a pretty prestigious job, and you make a lot of money. You kind of get mistaken for an aristocrat. But anyhow, I digress. There's my little spiel on politics in this video. The production quality started to pick back up in 1794. And I think some of the people who worked at these factories had fled the country whenever the revolution had kicked off. They started to see that things were not so deadly anymore and started to come back, and they were getting their old jobs back, and the production quality again kicked back up. But Monsieur Gribeauval is no longer with us. Honoré Blanc, he's gone, he's in the wind. I don't know if he died. You just stopped hearing about him after 1784. I'm just going to read this quote from this book here about the revolution. France felt like it was under siege. It had to arm itself very quickly to be in a position to defend its new political regime and its territory. In this climate of urgency and haste, the production capacities of the three large factories were found to be inadequate. In addition, the new leaders of the country had to face a hard reality. With the revolution, the leaders of the army and its various suppliers suddenly disappeared because they were part of the nobility. Many were executed, and some fled the country, and others were simply banished and stripped of all their functions. In any case, the production mechanism was broadly disorganized, which helps explain a major decline in the quality of the arms manufactured through the revolutionary period. This chaotic situation improved in 1794 with the end of the Reign of Terror, the hardest and the bloodiest phase of the revolutionary torment. So, there you have it. So now let's talk about the AN9, or the Courage AN9. And why in the world are we... The year of the Revolution 9? What? Well, to go into that, I'm going to have to go into a little bit of politics and a little bit of religion. Yes, religion actually plays a part into the story behind this gun. And remember what I said about the French Revolution being kind of like the Russian Communist Red Revolution? Well, part of that is a big crackdown on religion. You see, the French Revolution wasn't the friendliest to Christians. And a matter of fact, they saw the idea of the calendar, the Gregorian calendar, BC before Christ, AD Anno Domini, I guess that's how you pronounce it, in the year of our Lord, they saw that as old school and archaic, and this isn't how we're going to run our country now. We're getting rid of kicking Christ out of everything. So they changed their calendar to the year of the Revolution, or I think it's year of Revolution, and then put the number. And hence why AN is the French words for year of Revolution, 9. So 1799. And the corrigee is corrected because, remember what I said about the guns from 1794 to 1789 being very iffy in quality? And when I say iffy, like dangerous to shoot, this was starting to be picked up on pretty dramatically by the French government, especially whenever you got people like Austria over there and Britain over there and Russia way over there. These people, you're afraid that they're going to get very upset about you starting your new little republic in the middle of Europe and disturbing the order of things. And so they deemed, and rightfully so, hey, we're under threat. And it would actually be a artillery officer by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte. Little Corsican feller. I don't know if you've ever heard of him before. Sometimes goes by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte. He was the one that saw the big problem with the small arms, and he's like, these guns are terrible. And so he put together a committee. And this committee went and they started to see what was the shortcomings of the new muskets that were coming out, that were being put together by these, well, to put it plainly, these peasants. And what they were finding was poor raw material quality. It seems like some Grubeville or somebody like that went and mentioned that before. Poor spring, tempering, and drawing. Poor wood choices. They found that, and I'm just going to read them off here because I can't remember this stuff off the top of my head. Official tests showed that, on average, the lock of the model 1777 was failing to fire once in 20 tries, twice the rate of the British Brown Bess. According to General Gassendi, who directed the commission charged with developing the new arms that were to take part in any conflict, the French musket was acceptable overall, but clearly could be improved. The barrels often burst after 4,000 to 5,000 rounds. Hey, old Char's halfway there, and she's an Indian-made Bombay pipe bomb. A flint rarely produced more than 30 or so ignitions before needing to be replaced. The number of failures to ignite the priming in the pan was far from negligible. It seems that the cause of these problems was the quality of the iron used, rather than the actual design of the guns. If the guns were designed any poorer, they would probably fail to fire at all. The temper on the mainsprings and the frizens were often inadequate, producing a certain weakness in the ignition mechanism, as well as the hammer falls that lacked the force to necessarily produce enough sparks to assure proper ignition of the priming powder in the pan. The frizzen was capable of about 1,300 shots before needing to be replaced. Hey, my military heritage frizzen on my 1766 outlasted that. It made it to around 2,000 before it needed to be replaced. The lock and tumbler sear needed to be replaced after 12,000 rounds. On a perfectly maintained gun, the life expectancy of a barrel could approach 25,000 rounds with a full load, provided that the inside of the barrel was cleaned regularly to eliminate all risks of excess pressure. Problem, they fixed the guns. They actually made really good guns in the 1777 when they started picking up production, or actually hiring some good people again after the Reign of Terror. But they're running into another problem. Powder. Yes, French powder in the years of the Revolution was atrocious. They were using cannon powder. To put that into perspective, I use 1F for my muskets. You use 2F generally. The rule of thumb is generally, I think it's like 3F for anything under 45 caliber. 2F is, I believe, 54 to 45 caliber, and 1F is anything above 54. And then there's actually one that's even more coarse than 1F, that is cannon powder. And that is what the French were using. They were like, why do we need to have a special grain for rifles, or special grain for muskets, special grain for pistols, a special grain for artillery? Everything is going to fire the same thing, and because we can't load our cannons up with 3F, everything's going to fire cannon powder. And they had to bump the load up. They bumped the load up from 165 grains, which was the charge during the Revolutionary War, to 185 grains. Not only this, the cannon, the powder mixture was just off. Like I said, they lost a lot of good skilled labor during the Revolution, and the powder quality just kind of went into the trash can. But I do have the recipe here for some French powder if you want to hear it. It consists of the following: 3/4 saltpeter, 1/8 charcoal, and 1/8 sulfur. The granulation is to be very coarse, with about 350 granules of a very unequal size per 15 grains weight of 1 gram. For the infantry musket, the cartridge load was going to be bumped up to over 185 grains. There you go, for all you fuds out there. Oh, they've never fired over 75 grains of GoEx. And now, mind you, I get this powder's pretty bad, but whenever I shoot my homemade powder and I'm loading 165 grains, which is pretty close to Revolutionary War era powder, it's historically accurate. Now, when Napoleon put together this committee to build the new Courage AN-9 musket, he found that the 3 factories that were building the muskets for the French army were not enough anymore. So he went ahead and he bumped it up to the following: Charleville, number 1, Saint-Etienne, there's number 2, and Maubeuge. Those 3 are still in here, but here's the rest of them. Also Mutzig, Toul, and remember Toul, they build the fusil de chasse, a lot of those really cool old early 18th century guns. Now they're making Courage AN-9s. Rouen, Liège, Belgium, basically the same town where Fabrique Nationale is nowadays. Versailles and Colombourg, Holland, and Turin, Italy. So all these different, like I said just there, countries or other countries are making these guns now, and they picked up in quality quite a bit. They did not get back up to that original standard of the 1777 under Gribeval, but they were much better than the Revolutionary period 1777s. And really, the AN-9 is going to be produced until 1820. In 1815, we all know what happens. Napoleon meets his Waterloo, literally gets beat. Before that, obviously we got the Battle of Leipzig, we've got the Battle of, Leipzig, or the Battle of the Nations, Austerlitz, you've got the wars going in Austria, you got Moscow and Russia, and that's what I kind of want to go into to conclude this up a little bit. So, now mind you, this is, like I said, a replica, but to feel the feeling of a soldier of that time period and what it was like to shoot one of these things. One of these things that you had to keep running in order to, basically, this is what kept you, well, it might not keep you alive, but it was one of the best things you could keep your trust in. It's just out of this world. It's a weird feeling, but it's a really kind of cool feeling. These guns are going to go to Italy. They're going to go to Austria. They're going to go to Russia. And that's something I want to mention. People are like, oh, those guns were so terrible. That's the reason why Napoleon lost the whole war. No, the reason why Napoleon lost the whole war is because he tried to invade Russia in the winter. And his enemies found out that if you run from Napoleon, he will chase you. And if you run far enough, long enough, and fast enough, he will chase you to the end of the earth. At that point, just wait till winter sets in Russia, and then, just let them starve to death. The guys who carried these, like the ones that went into Russia, it's just insane the casualties they took. By the time they got home, the guys that were carrying this kind of musket, out of every 6 men, only 1 came home. I mean, that's just mind-boggling. And a lot of people will, regardless of what side you're talking about, a lot of people will say, oh, they were all a bunch of idiots back then. Just stand in line 20 yards away from each other and shoot at each other. What a bunch of idiots. No, I think you've got the term stupidity mistaken with guts. Because you really had to believe in what you were fighting for in order to stand 100 yards away from somebody and take fire and return it. Now, whether or not that was the right thing to be putting your faith in or not, well, that's up for debate. But at least they stood up for something, unlike most of us today. So, there you have it. The complete history of the 1777 and the AN-9 Courage musket, as well as I can tell it. So, if you like this video, go ahead, be sure to like, share, comment, ring the bell, do all the thingy things. And go ahead, like I said, put a comment down there. If you have better knowledge on this than I do, feel free to put it in there. This is as good as I can do for now. But yes, this is the right arm of l'Empereur and Napoleon. And it's a really, like I said, this is, in my opinion, the greatest design of flintlock musket an infantryman could ever ask for.
So as always, guys, thank you for watching. Trust in God. Viva l'Empereur! And keep your powder dry. Bye.